Welcome back to Drum Electric. So this is episode 3 of 3, looking at how to build an Ableton backing track rig from scratch. So in this episode, I'm now going to be importing samples to the SPD-SX, MIDI controlling Ableton, and then finally playing along with it. So if you want to check out any of the other videos, you can check out the playlist up here. So let's hop straight into it. Let's hop onto the Mac that we've been using for the last 2 episodes, and let's import the samples that we got from the last video onto the SPD-SX. So as a reminder, here are the samples that we got from the last video. We only needed 3, a clap, a kick, and the snare drum that we got from the actual song. This is what they sound like. It's pretty stunning. They're samples. So in the first video of this series, we installed the Roland Wave Manager for the SPD-SX. So I'm going to load that up by clicking in the dock, because we put it in the dock in the first video, in a very handy place. So you're going to get this pop up, select storage. And now that we've actually got the SPD-SX plugged in, it's just off camera here, it brings up device SPD-SX. I'm going to hit OK, and there we go. There is the SPD-SX Wave Manager. So this will load up everything that you have on your SPD-SX. You might not have anything, and therefore it will load all of the demo patches, or it'll adjust it to yours. I've got a kit somewhere on here called Dino 1. There it is. I use it in all my Drum Electric episodes, and it's a wonderful thing. So I'm going to clear this off because I don't need any of this. So if you're searching for a pad to use, I tend to go all the way up to, I think it's the 40s in the SPD-SX, and that's where you tend to find a blank kit, or you can just use any of the demo ones and delete all of it and do it all again. All of the samples will be kept in the SPD-SX unless you delete them, so you can always recreate those kits if you need them. So here's our blank kit, Dino 1. If you want to rename the kit, by the way, just click on kit name and rename it in there. Dino 1 is an excellent name, so I'm going to keep that. So now we want to import the samples. To do that, I'm going to create a new category just to keep it all organized, because I like that. I'm just going to name it Drum Electric, because that'll do. Hit OK. You can see it up there. It's missed off the C, but I'll take it. Now we want to import the samples by hitting the little paper button next to it. So I'm just going to hit add, and I'm going to find the samples. Once I found them, I'm just going to hit open in the dialog, and then they'll appear here. If they're not appearing here, or there's a problem, it'll come up with an error message, and it should tell you why. But it's probably because they need to be exported as a .wav in 16-bit and 44.1. The SPD-SX is really fussy when it comes to that, and they have to be in that format. It's a little bit annoying, but we carry on anyway. So as you can see, mine are there. I'm just going to choose the category. I'm going to put it into Drum Electric, so it imports it into there. Just going to hit import. And the whole thing crashes. Okay, I figured it out. So the reason why it crashed is because those samples were named the same thing as samples that I already had on the SPD-SX. So I've just renamed them, so it's clap DR, kick DR, and then snare drum L for Drum Electric. So if that happens to you, if it just weirdly crashes, try renaming your samples, and then hopefully it should work. Now that we've done that, all we have to do is drag and drop. So I've labeled my actual SPD-SX, as you can see on the screen. So I'm going to put the snare here, I'm going to put the kick here, and then I'm actually then going to put the claps on this one here that says closed hats, because I'm a monster. So kick goes here, so just drag and drop. Snare, where was that? Goes there. And then claps go here. And that is that. It's as easy as that. That's how you import it onto the SPD-SX. Now we just hit the exit button, disconnect the SPD-SX, and there we go. Dino 1, the best kit to rule them all. So I'm just going to check by going into menu, pad, move across. So we've got kick dur, snare drum L, and then clap dur. Perfect. So there's a couple of settings I just want to change on the samples to make sure that they work every time. So the first one, the kick sample, I'm going to make sure the volume's 100, the pan is in the center, and there's no mute groups, and the mode is single. It's a shot. I'm going to turn off the dynamics and then make sure there's nothing on the sub. And I'm just going to make sure those settings are replicated on all 3 samples. Before we head into now the MIDI settings on the SPD-SX, just be sure to put samples on so you still have room to MIDI assign the SPD-SX. So I put it on these bottom 3 here, and that's because the 3 above that are what's going to be to control Ableton via MIDI, which we're going to do now. So before we head into Ableton and change settings, we need to go over to the SPD-SX to make sure it all works. So the first thing, and this is really important, is actually the MIDI settings of the SPD-SX. So we need to make sure that each pad is sending out the correct MIDI signal to Ableton. So by default, the SPD-SX, have I said SPD-SX enough again? This happened in the last video. By default, they all send out the same MIDI note or no MIDI note at all. So that means if I assigned the play button to one pad and the stop to another pad, they'd conflict because they're sending out the same signal. So to change this is really easy. All you do on the specific patch you're using, because it changes per patch, is you head into Menu, you go over to Kit, and then you go over to MIDI at the bottom here. Now the MIDI channel global basically means it will send out on all MIDI channels. If you're using multiple different MIDI controllers, so for example the SPD-SX and maybe a little pad thing to change patches, you'll want to make sure that those channels are different. So I'm just going to set the SPD-SX MIDI channel to channel 1, which keeps it simple. The MIDI note will change per pad. So right now we're on this pad down here. To change that, we can see the little graphic in the bottom right of the screen, and we just use the arrow keys to change it. So I'm just going to go left. I'm going to start from the top. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to start MIDI note. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and carry on going all the way up to 9 in this case. Once that's done, you should hopefully have every pad being the pad channel 1 and the MIDI note number 1 through 9. Now we might need to change this because it depends how Ableton reads it, but this is how you do it. You just go into the settings here and you can adjust it. So if you ever have conflicting MIDI things, so something's triggering something that shouldn't, that's how you change it. So from there, we can just hit the kit button and that's it. Now the last thing we need to do on the SPD-SX is actually make sure that it sends out MIDI rather than the wave manager to change samples. So all we need to do that, really simple, is head into Menu, down to Settings, and then all the way down to Option, and then USB mode. Just hit the plus or minus buttons to change that to audio/MIDI. That's nice and easy. Then we just hit Kit and we're good to get into Ableton. Okay, so here we are back in Ableton. It's exactly the same as the last video. Haven't touched it, which is quite nice. So let's MIDI assign the SPD-SX to everything on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the USB to the laptop, and then, because we installed the drivers in the first video of this series, we can head into Preferences, all the way down to MIDI, which is just here, and then you should see, I have a lot, so I apologise, but you should see the SPD-SX, SPD-SX MIDI, and then SPD-SX. They could have made that easier. They really could have. So you can pretty much duplicate my settings here. So in SPD-SX, is track ticked and remote ticked. The SPD-SX MIDI is just remote. SPD-SX out is track, and then SPD-SX MIDI out is track as well. I'll be honest, it's been so long since I've looked at those settings, I can't exactly remember what they mean. So I know that that works. That's all we need to do there. Then we can just exit out of the settings. Now, what we want to do is check that we're getting a MIDI input when we hit the SPD-SX into Ableton. And to do that, we're going to hit the SPD-SX, but we're going to look at the top right up here. There's two little squares and an orange one is going to flash when we hit it. Cool. So the key thing here is it flashed, it all works, and nothing changed on the project, which means that nothing is set for MIDI, which is good, because that means we'll have no conflicting things. So the first thing I'm going to do is assign the play button. Now all we need to do is hit the MIDI button at the top right here, everything turns blue, you click on the button that you want to assign, so in my case the play button, it selects it, and then I just hit the SPD-SX, and we're done. You can see a little 2 there, it will show the fact that it's been assigned a MIDI note. I'm going to do the same thing for the stop button. There we go, it's been assigned. And then finally, the markers here. So these two little arrows means that we can move the playhead forward and back per the markers that we set in the last video. So verse 1, chorus 1, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to set that one there. I'm going to click on that. There we go. Click on this. There we go. Once we're done, we can just click on the MIDI and it's all good to go. So I'm going to hit the play button. Hey! So I'm going to keep it playing and I'm going to skip forward and back with the next and previous buttons. And there we go. We can fully control Ableton from the SPD-SX now via MIDI. So the last element of this before we get into actually playing on the kit is now assigning the outputs so we can have different outputs going to different places. So I've got the Focusrite 18920 and then the DI box I showed in episode 1 plugged in. So all we need to do is head into Live, Preferences, make sure that there it is, 18920 is there, 18920 is there. So just check that works by bringing up the Focusrite control, which is here, looks like this now that we've got everything plugged in. I'm just going to hit play. And there we go. It all works. So now what we're going to do is we're going to configure essentially this using Focusrite control to send the outputs into the right places. So what I want is 2 outputs for the stereo backing track because we all like things in stereo. Then I want 1 for click and then I want 1 for the SPD-SX because I'll route the SPD-SX through Ableton. So I have control of how loud it is for me because the amount of times I've gone to a gig and they've forgotten to turn on the SPD-SX in my monitor is far too many times. So I'm going to make sure I have control over that this time. So just a little pre-warning about this, my 18920 is really old. So it's starting to get to the point where some outputs are a little bit faulty or they're just not quite working right. So this might be slightly different for you. So the way I've routed mine is line outputs 3 and 4 is actually the playback. So that's the backing track. That's going to be the stereo backing track. I've split outputs 5 and 6 by just hitting the stereo button here, makes them 2 mono tracks. Output 5 is going to be the click, and then output 6 is going to be the SPD-SX. So this is really important to remember because now we're going to assign it in Ableton. So in Ableton, I'm going to hit the tab key to switch back to session view. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a return track. Now this is going to be my drum monitor. So I'm going to click it, Command R, there we go. And that's because I'll output everything to my in-ears directly from the 18920 because that will be sat next to me on the gig. So audio 2, external out, and that's going to be outputs 7 and 8 because if you go onto Focusrite control, output 7 and 8 is my headphone output. So now that we've sorted our in-ears, now we need to sort where the actual tracks themselves are going. So on click, we want to make sure that's going to output 5 because that's where I've assigned it. So audio from, no input because I don't want it to pick up something by accident. And then I want the audio to go external out, output 5. Just check that one more time, output 5. And then the click will just send to output 5 on there. The bass and instruments, they are both part of the actual track. So I want them just to go to front of house. Audio from on both is no input because I don't want it to pick up something. And then the audio 2, I'm actually going to send them to master. And over here on the master channel, I'm going to put the master out as 3 and 4 because if I check on here, line outputs 3 and 4, I want it to be the backing track. And that basically just means that it's a lot more efficient way of sending them rather than on each track going external out, external out, external. They can just send to master, which is really nice. So I'm now going to hit play and I'm just going to check that we won't be able to hear click and we will be able to hear track. There we go, click's going and we hear nothing, which is good. And there we go. So now the last thing we need to do is just configure our in-ears so we can hear both the click and the backing track and it doesn't affect the output. And that's why we created a return track so we can do all of that. So we're just going to use the send knob here to adjust the volume. So I'm going to hit play. Hopefully you should be able to hear what I hear as well. So I'm going to turn up the click. Turn up the bass. Make it a bit quieter than the click. And there we go. Then we have full control of our own mix. It doesn't affect the front of house and we can adjust it all accordingly. Now the last thing, I did just say the last thing was the last thing, but the last thing is actually creating the audio track for the SPD-SX so we can hear it. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create an audio track. I'm going to name it SPD-SX. The audio is going to be from channel 8, and that's purely because I'm putting the SPD-SX through the DI box and then the DI box output into the input 8 of the Focusrite 18920. And that's just because it won't conflict with channels 1 to 7 and I deliberately have to select channel 8 and it's very rare that I put anything in channel 8 when I'm on a gig. On the monitor, I'm going to put it on in, because obviously you want to get the input. And the audio 2, I'm going to look at Focusrite control. Line output 6 is the SPD-SX. External out 6. And then I can control the volume here, so I can hear it in my ears, and then the sound engineer has control over how loud they have it their end. And that's the full rig, that's the full setup. So that's how I run backing tracks for a show, that's how I MIDI control Ableton with the SPD-SX, and then that's how I output it, so I have control over my mix, and then I can equally send out individual tracks to the sound engineer. So now's the fun bit. I'm going to turn around, I'm going to play the kit, and hope that it all works. And there we go, that's the full rig. That's how I build an Ableton backing track from scratch all the way up to the finished product. And this is something that I now use on gigs. So whenever I'm setting up a backing track rig, this is my basis of how I set it up. You can get a little bit more complicated from here by automating drum pads, which you can check out a video on up here. So as always, please like and subscribe for our shiny new videos, and I will see you in the next one.